Hey everybody, it's Holly here today for MarkerPop, and today we're going to be using this fun new stamp set from Nooks called Cultivated Cacti. This is part of the June release that just came out, and it's now available in the store. I'm also going to be using the coordinating dies that go with this set. Mine aren't in the package right now because I was using them, but there is a coordinating die. Again, that's Cultivated Cacti. And then we're also going to be using a couple of products from MFT. We're going to be using Blueprint Sketch number 27. I'm going to be using the scallop border. And then I'm also going to use the Stitch Sentiment strips. I'm going to use the one that got the stitched lines the whole way around it. And then we're going to be using some Tim Holtz Distress Ink watercolor paper. And we're also going to be using a bunch of Lawn Fawn ink pads. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm also using some Mustard Seed Distress ink. So I'm going to start with that. And I'm going to smoosh that down onto my craft mat, and this is something that I do a lot in my videos, so it's not anything special. I'm just using a piece of plastic. So I'm smooshing the ink onto the craft mat, and then I'm spritzing it with some water, and then I'm picking it up with the plastic sheet, and then I'm smooshing it down onto the paper. And this is a great way to use your distress inks because you can control where your ink's going to go. It's a little easier than the practice where you would just spray the ink on the mat and then flip the cardstock over. You don't really have as much control as to where your color is going to go. So then once I have that all spritz on there, I'm going to go ahead and use my heat tool and dry that out. And then once I have that nice and dried, I'm going to go ahead and add a second layer. And then I'm going to dry that again. And then I'm going to take my spritzer bottle and I'm going to unscrew it, and I'm just going to sprinkle some drop slits on there. I prefer to do it this way than use the actual spritzer itself. It tends to make bigger splotches. Then I'm going to use a paper towel to dab those up. And then I'm going to hit it with my heat tool again one more time. And then I'm just going to set that aside. And then I'm using a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. Now, in order to do this technique I'm going to show you, I recommend you use a smooth piece of cardstock. It doesn't work as well with a rough textured cardstock. So I really like the Neenah Solar White for this. So I'm going to start out by putting the images onto the Misty. And then I'm stamping the first layer in the Celery Stick ink from Lawn Fawn. And then I'm going back over with a darker shade of ink, adding a little bit on to the stamp in certain places. Then I'm just adding my fingertip and smoothing the ink out so it's kind of more even. And then then I'm stamping it again. And then I go on to another darker shade, so that's my third darkest shade. Again, I'm using my finger to smooth out the ink a little bit. And I'm only keeping it to one side of the image to kind of give it a two-tone effect. It's kind of like the rock and roll technique, but I'm adding my finger in there to smooth the ink out a little bit. And then after I do the third layer, I go back with the first color I use to kind of smooth everything out. And then I'm going to go in one more time with the final layer with the darkest ink, which for me was Noble Fir. So I started out with Celery Stick, and then I went into Jalapeno, and then I used Freshly Cut Grass, and then I went back with Celery Stick, and then I added the Noble Fir. And then in between, I use my finger to kind of smooth everything out a little bit. Now I'm going to go ahead and repeat the process again with the vases. And we'll go through this whole thing again. So I'm going to start out with a layer of the Peacock ink. So I'm stamping the Peacock ink onto the images once. Now these aren't images that I've used before, so they're not seasoned, so they are a little splotchy. It doesn't matter. Then I'm going to put the fish tank ink on, and then I'm going to go ahead and use my finger and spread that around onto the stamp a little bit more to give a little bit more coverage. And then I'm going to stamp that back down. And then I'm going to go back over it with another little bit of the fish tank, just to kind of darken that up a little bit. And on these vases, it kind of gives it like an ombre effect. Then I'm going to go in with my Blue Jay, which is my darkest color. Using my finger still, I'm going to kind of smush the ink out or spread it out a little bit. And then I'm going to go back in again with a little bit more, and then I go back in again with a layer of the Peacock. And that actual layer is actually optional. So here I'm going to show you your fingers get really inky with this, and even when you're messing with distress inks. The Ranger Craft Scrubbie works really good to get all these inks off of your finger. So if you've got one of these or you want to look for one of these, it's called the Craft Scrubbie. Really good to get your ink off of your fingers. So then I'm going to go ahead and stamp the little flower. And for that one, I'm going to do the same technique. I'm going to stamp it in the Ballet Slippers ink, and then I'm going to add a little bit of the plastic Flamingo just around the edge. And then once these are all done, I'm going to go ahead and use the coordinating dies to cut those out with my Big Shot. And while I'm cutting that out, I'm also going to cut the main panel that has my distress ink on it with that MFT Blueprints 27, that scalloped edge. So I have a piece of Nina Solar White cardstock that I just cut down to A2 size and I folded in half. I'm going to go ahead and adhere that distress ink panel to it directly onto the card front. I'm not adding any foam tape or anything behind it because I'm going to have a lot of foam tape on my cacti, so I don't want it to be too thick. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding the cactuses, and what I did is I glued the vase to the cactus with just some glue, a tape runner, added the first one down directly onto the card panel, and then I added the other cactuses and vases together with the tape runner as well. Then I'm adding one layer of foam adhesive to the cactus that's on the left there, and then I'm going to go ahead and add 2 layers of foam adhesive to the one on the right, so that gives it a little extra height. And then while I was die cutting the images and the panel, I went ahead and die cut one of those stitch sentiment strips out of some of that white paper as well. And then I'm going to use the Blue Jay ink from Fawn to stamp the sentiment on there. And you'll see that my sentiment was seasoned, so it's one time stamping down with the ink right onto the paper. And you can see here, that's a perfectly smooth, no splotches, anything on that. So once you get your stamps really seasoned, the Fawn ink is just awesome to work with. So then you're going to go ahead and I just trimmed off the sentiment strip, and then I'm adding some foam adhesive to that. And then I'm just going to slip that up underneath the vase. And then once I have the sentiment in place where I want it, after I trim it up a little bit here, I'm going to go ahead and add some sparkling clear sequins from Pretty Pink Posh, just to add a little bit of bling to my image. And that pretty much finishes my card for today. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you again next week with a new video. Be sure to stop by the shop and check out the new Nooks release if you haven't already. So have a great week, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.